Hey, I'm Blair Best. It's Wednesday here on The Story, and tonight, an update out of Washington County and the proposed budget cuts there, what programs are on the chopping block, and why county leaders say their hands are tied. Plus, new research looking at how a massive earthquake, the big one, could impact those on the Oregon coast for decades to come. But first, Oregon was the first state in the country to legalize medical aid in dying for terminally ill patients back in the mid-90s. So how is that program doing now, 30 years later? It's our big story tonight. Oregon's law is called the Death with Dignity Act. In 1994, the Citizens Initiative passed by a slim margin of 51 to 49%, and legal challenges delayed it from taking effect until the fall of 1997. Under the act, the Oregon Health Authority is required to gather information about patients and doctors who participate and publish an annual report. Well, now we're getting a look at the latest data from 2024. It includes this graph that charts the number of prescriptions written for lethal amounts of medication and the number of people who died by choosing to take them. OHA began collecting data back in 1998, and you can see a pretty clear trend of the number of prescriptions outpacing the number of deaths throughout the Act's history. Now, looking at the last 5 years, we see a dramatic spike in both prescriptions and deaths between 2022 and 2023. According to OHA data, prescriptions increased around 30% in 2023 compared to 2022, and deaths increased roughly 20%. OHA attributed this spike to an amendment to the law in 2023 that removed a requirement that patients live in Oregon to use the program. Their data shows that out of 2,481 deaths between 1998 and 2022, 3 were out-of-state patients. Now compare that to 2023, where out of 386 deaths, 25 were out-of-state patients. And in 2024, 22 out of 376 deaths were out-of-state patients. Okay, I know a lot of numbers there, but the fact that more of these prescriptions are going out and not being used caught our attention. OHA says that in context with the rest of the data over the last 20 plus years, it's in line with the general trend, as it's happened 3 other times since 2000. As far as the reason why OHA thinks more prescriptions are being written, the agency points to media coverage and awareness that medical aid in dying is an option.
I think what we see in this data is that the law is working as intended. A very small number of people will request this medication every year. A smaller number, in fact, will take it to the point where it is only 0.9% of all deaths in Oregon were from ingesting Death with Dignity Act medication. What we see as well is the discrepancy in the number of people who request the medication but never take it. That is, again, the law functioning as intended.
All right, that's Callie Riley, the regional director for the national nonprofit called Compassion and Choices. They advocate for expanding options for end-of-life care, including working to get Oregon's Death with Dignity Act passed in the first place. They're also helping push for similar legislation in states like Delaware, Illinois, and Montana. And while they don't work directly with patients anymore, they do provide resources for anyone considering their end-of-life care options. So we asked her to elaborate on the difference between the number of prescriptions written and deaths.
We don't think any one person should, request a prescription, should ingest it simply because they've requested it. We think that the patient should be able to decide for themselves. And so we know in many cases is that simply having the peace of mind that this is an option or having the medication available without ingesting it can itself relieve a terminally ill patient's suffering. It is itself palliative.
However, for some, like the pro-life organization Oregon Right to Life, that discrepancy in data is cause for concern. Here's the executive director of that group, Lois Anderson.
The reason why we are so concerned about that is, first of all, it reveals that the idea that that physicians, the medical community can consistently and accurately diagnose whether or not you have 6 or fewer months to live. It has always been it's not true. From the beginning, the medical doctors have told us that's just not a thing. We can guess, we can predict in some ways, but there really isn't a consistent, for sure way to know how long somebody is going to live with a diagnosis. The second thing is that means that there are doses of drugs laying around in somebody's house that can kill someone.
Here's how the death with dignity process works now. Patients must be 18 years old or older, capable of making and communicating their own healthcare decisions, and diagnosed with a terminal condition that will lead to death within 6 months. It's up to the doctor the patient is working with to decide whether all 3 of those criteria are met. If so, the patient then has to make 2 separate verbal requests to the doctor, at least 15 days apart. They must provide a written request to the doctor signed by 2 witnesses, with at least one who isn't related to the patient. The primary doctor working with the patient has to confirm their diagnosis and prognosis with a consulting doctor. Both doctors have to confirm that the patient can make healthcare decisions for themselves. After the 15-day waiting period is over, the written request has been submitted and they have consulted another doctor. The primary doctor must wait an additional 48 hours before writing the prescription. The primary doctor also has to inform the patient of any feasible alternatives to taking the prescription, things like hospice care and pain control. Now, the patient can rescind their request at any time during the process, and the doctor will offer an opportunity to do so at the end of the waiting period. Now, there are a few exceptions to the current waiting period of 15 days for people who are given less than that much time to live. But as far as the standard process goes, doctors are required to report every step to OHA, as well as follow up to inform OHA about how the patient died. But a new bill in Salem could change that process. Most notably, Senate Bill 1003 would reduce the waiting period after a patient asks for the medication from 15 days to 7. It would also make a slight adjustment to the consulting doctor requirement. Now, last month during public testimony, more than 150 people spoke out against the bill, with only a handful in favor.
Even some physicians themselves are really not trained to make a 6-month diagnosis in the first place. They're not specialists in that area. And it really isn't just a random thing that we're talking about giving somebody a prescription for medication that will kill them if they take it. This is so it's a very serious diagnosis. It's a very serious prescription and decision by the patient as well as the medical provider.
But there are aspects of the bill that supporters say close key gaps in end-of-life care for patients.
The good about Senate Bill 1003 is that it requires hospices and healthcare facilities to disclose their policies around medical aid in dying to patients. We think that transparency helps consumers make an informed decision about where to get hospice services, where to seek healthcare services, making sure that your hospice or your healthcare facility is going to offer the kinds of care that align with your values, priorities, and beliefs. Reducing the waiting period is really important. In the newly amended version of the bill, that is down to 7 days from 15. And then creating an electronic filing system for records really kind of modernizes the reporting infrastructure for the Death with Dignity Act. Having to deal with paper forms, faxed forms can be a little bit cumbersome. And so we think that in as much as the state is doing that kind of reporting, that it is going to improve it.
Well, right now, the bill is being evaluated by the Senate Rules Committee, and we'll keep tabs on it in the weeks to come. So, talk to us. What do you think about the Death with Dignity Act? Is it something that you think is a good option for people to have if they have a terminal illness? Tell us why or why not. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Well, Washington County released its proposed budget for the next fiscal year. And now some agencies are trying to figure out how they're going to handle some pretty deep cuts. The county has to close a gap of more than $20 million. The proposal shows leaders are leaning toward cutting funding from the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program that works to fix roads. And that program faces a cut of around $8.7 million. And the Washington County libraries could lose $3.9 million. So, what makes up the rest of the $20 million shortfall? The public safety and justice programs are together facing the possibility of more than $7 million in cuts. Now, some open jobs for patrol officers and jail deputies would be eliminated. Juvenile detention services would be outsourced, and the Child Support Division in the District Attorney's Office would be outsourced to the state, eliminating 19 local jobs. Now, it's a branch of the DA's office that's been around since the 1960s. It's something that District Attorney Kevin Barton warned us about earlier this month during a budget preview story that I covered. Well, we caught up with him again this week, and he told us that cutting that program will hurt the single parents who rely on it.
We collect millions of dollars annually for these people, these single moms and these children, and our unit that does that work will discontinue. All of that work will then be shifted to the state, who will pick up that work, but we're concerned because we believe that our office does that work at such a high level that will be a negative impact on children and on single parents in our community.
Barton says he's also concerned that there's going to be the same amount of crime in the county, but fewer people in his office to prosecute it, leading to slower processing and burnout among his staff.
It doesn't keep pace with the community needs. So we've seen this over the years where as cases get more complicated, we have more mental health issues and drug issues and increased crime, including violent crime and property crime. We need more people to be able to do that work, more prosecutors to prosecute the cases, more victim advocates to work with our crime victims, more support staff. And unfortunately, our budget has not increased as much as it needs to over the years. It's almost like someone not getting a COLA every year. Eventually, the amount that you're receiving is far less compared to the cost of inflation. And we've seen that happening here in our community where we have an inflated amount of criminal activity occurring, but we haven't had the resources increase.
The county says that even though they've had huge population growth, the amount of revenue from property taxes they have access to has not kept up, constrained by provisions in the Oregon Constitution, they say. So that surge in population means more demand on services without the added funding, which is a major reason Washington County has had a budget deficit for the past 5 years straight. There are meetings about the proposed budget over the next few weeks, and if you want to weigh in, the first one is Monday, May 12th. Well, now going across the Columbia to Washington State, an update to a story we first told you about last week. The only drug treatment center in the state that helps both mothers and their drug-affected babies under the same roof looks like it will stay open after all. Maddie's Place was on the brink of closure, relying on funding that appeared to be cut from the state budget. But in a last-minute move, the state legislature allocated $2 million to keep it open. The facility in Spokane helps newborns and parents with addiction services, something experts say Washington needs right now more than ever. While the number of babies born with drugs in their system has been declining nationwide, a recent Washington State University report revealed that in 2022, the number of babies born withdrawing from drugs in Washington was nearly double the national average. In Spokane, that rate was more than triple.
So many babies that need the help still, and we don't know how many more will need the help.
The money allocated from the state isn't coming from taxpayers. It's from a fund created when large opioid companies had to pay for their role in the opioid epidemic. The CEO of Maddie's Place says they're now looking for a long-term solution, as the $2 million will only last until next summer. Governor Bob Ferguson still needs to sign the state's budget before the funding for Maddie's Place becomes set in stone, and he's got 18 days, excluding Sundays, to decide. Well, still ahead on the story, we're taking you inside a wash house in Portland's Central East Side.
So I just want to be a symbol of hope for my friends.
How they're hoping to start a new cycle in people's lives. Plus, we often hear about the big one, the major earthquake expected here in the Northwest, but new research shines a light on the devastating coastal impacts and what needs to be done now to prepare. That's next when the story returns. A laundry facility in Portland's Central East Side is helping people who don't have access to washers and dryers, many of them homeless. The center is funded by the city's Impact Reduction Program. That's the same group in charge of clearing campsites. Ashley Grams gives us a closer look.
Yeah, we're gonna unload them.
From the washer to the dryer and back again. There's always a new cycle starting at the wash house on Portland's Central East Side.
It's pretty good stuff.
The laundry program focuses on three things. The first is taking care of shelter bedding. They routinely support the North Portland Salvation Army shelter and say they can wash thousands of pounds of bedding a month.
Each washer runs for about 49 minutes.
What's up, Terrence?
How you doing, Sarge?
Doing good.
Good.
Second, they serve walk-in clients, washing clothes and bedding for people who don't have access to a washer and dryer.
The reaction that we get from the people that bring their clothes in is crazy. Because most people just throw their clothes away because they can't wash them.
Katie Kitchens is the wash house lead and understands the struggle. While homeless,
Off and on for 6 years, so.
she often relied on friends when she needed clean clothes.
It's we don't judge, we're just here to help.
I'm trying to make a difference with my life now.
Terrence Freeman, who's on staff at the wash house, also spent some time on the streets of Portland.
I've been clean for 21 months. Yeah, 21 months in love and life.
Freeman and Kitchens both work for Ground Score Association. The organization staffs and operates the wash house, which is funded by the city of Portland. The wash house also runs other items through the machines, mostly clothing picked up by Rapid Response. The third goal of the wash house is to redistribute clean items back into the community and salvage textiles before they hit the landfill. For Kitchens and Freeman, something as simple as detergent and a timer
I like giving back.
can have a profound effect
Oh, they're so thankful.
and help start a new cycle both in their lives and the lives of others.
I just want to be a symbol of hope for my friends.
Ashley Grams, KGW News.
A catastrophic earthquake in the Pacific Northwest. It would topple buildings and bridges, not to mention the damage from a tsunami. And new research is showing another concern that's worse than previously thought. Joe Ranieri has more.
There's just something breathtaking about the scene along the West Coast, a coastline that could look dramatically different in the event of a major earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone.
What we looked at is kind of a lesser thought about and lesser known consequence of the next earthquake, which is the land subsidence, or the way the land is going to drop down.
The Cascadia subduction zone is about 40 miles off the coast. Dr. Tina Dura is the lead researcher and professor at Virginia Tech in the Department of Geosciences.
We know it can do this from the coastal geology and the evidence that we see in the sediments of the coastal marshes that show that the land has repeatedly dropped by that amount.
Dura says there could be as much as 4 to 8 feet of ground that could collapse.
The dropping down of the land is something that can persist for decades to centuries after the earthquake.
That kind of drop would increase flooding too.
And it's not going to go in the sort of Superman movie type of way, cracks opening in the ground and swallowing everybody into them.
Diego Melgar is the director of Crescent, the Cascadia Region Earthquake Science Center at the University of Oregon. He's been working on this research with Dura.
And what that means for folks is that as the land drops, that's like if sea level had suddenly risen 4 to 8 feet. So we're going to see lots of impacts in that we're going to lose certain kinds of land.
Melgar says places along the coast that aren't in a floodplain would be at risk for flooding after a major earthquake like a 9.0.
We can be thinking about how to prepare, how to adapt. We're really good at engineering. We're really good at geosciences. There's stuff we can do so that we're not caught unawares when this happens.
Making plans today, he says, will help in our future along the West Coast. Joe Ranieri, KGW News.
And one of those plans to make now is to be thoughtful about infrastructure, where to put critical buildings like hospitals and schools, to be as prepared as possible when the big one hits. Well, still ahead here on the story, 50 years after the fall of Saigon, a Washington woman remembers her harrowing last days in Vietnam, how she was welcomed to the U.S., and how she's been paying it forward for the past 3 decades. When the story returns. Today marks 50 years since the fall of Saigon, marking the end of the Vietnam War. In the following years, more than 750,000 Vietnamese refugees came to America. Among them, a Washington woman who is still living the legacy of that era. Eric Wilkinson has the story.
Excuse me.
Van Dien Kuno remembers the fall of Saigon like a war movie in slow motion.
You see the dead body laying on the street, in the gutter.
She was just 17 years old when North Vietnamese forces took the city, setting her family scrambling to escape.
My father is just desperate to have the family get out safely.
Van's family of 11 made it to a crowded boat. This document proving her father's military service for the United States, securing them a spot. They sailed for 11 days, dodging rocket fire, running out of fuel and food, surviving on rainwater when they were rescued by the U.S. Navy.
I remember really well, all of a sudden you feel so much better. You feel, you're no longer sick. You're no longer sad. You think you see hope there.
Van and her family arrived with literally nothing but the clothes on their backs. A church in Minnesota agreed to sponsor them.
They wrote it by hand.
Church members provided this handwritten survival guide for a new life in America. They housed and fed the family until they got on their feet. Van's gratitude is real today as it was then.
When you lose everything, you lose your house, you lose your future.
50 years later, part of Van is still that young refugee welcome to the shores of America. Now she's paying it forward here at Everett Community College.
Hi, how's you?
For the past 34 years, Van has run Refugee and Immigrant Services Northwest, helping new arrivals to this country assimilate. Her life coming full circle.
To make sure the people come after me had the same opportunity like I had to be a successful, to be a productive citizen in this country.
And while today's America may not seem as welcoming to immigrants as it did 50 years ago, Van's love for this country has not faltered.
United States of America is still the best place to live. I want to take this opportunity to let American people know I am thankful for you.
Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air the episode at 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on our TV app, KGW+. It'll also be there the next day at 11:30 a.m. And you can download that free app right now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Have a great Wednesday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.